Haydn is not a composer that I know very well. I have had for a long time this picture in my head of a composer that wasn't really interesting and that was rather superficial. And I don't think I am the only one thinking like that, considering how relatively unknown large parts of his repertoire are, including his keyboard works. And I think that the very even way those pieces are played, and the fact that they are also played rather fast, um, explain for a large part why I had these thoughts about Haydn. And this particular sonata, I don't think it is played for any other purposes than didactic ones. But it is quite a beautiful work, very C.P. Bach-like, and very nice to play. So Wim asked us to research a little bit about the meaning of an allegro. So Koch and Leopold Mozart defined it as a moderative fast movement. Fétis and Moscheles, as well as Hummel, define it as cheerful and animated. So that doesn't help us a lot to understand what the composers had in mind when they put those Italian tempo words above their scores. But that means also that we have to understand those tempo words in their context. And I think that it is made really clear in the sources, or relatively clear at least. And this context I personally divide into two different parts. The first one being what I would call the proper rules about interpretations, or rather the rules about the proper interpretation, and the second one being the notation itself. So about the rules about interpretations, I mean by that all the practical aspects of performance practice. And one thing that is that we can find a lot in different sources is calls for clarity. And we can see that, for instance, in this quote by Türk, who says that each note should sound really clear and should be independent from others' notes. And as Wim explained, clarity is not subjective, and the ear cannot perceive, cannot differentiate between the different notes above a speed about 10 notes per second, and that is a huge problem for single beat theory, since Allegro moderato in single beat are metronomized around quarter note 120 and quarter note 156 for common time signature with 16th notes as fastest note value. So that means a speed about between 8 notes per second and even notes per second. So we see that already with Allegro moderato we have reached an upper speed limit in single beat, which is not at all the case, of course, in whole beat. Then we have many aspects of performance practice that are described in sources. Not always easy to really understand them and to put them in the right context, but we can still try to reconstruct that. And one aspect is accentuation, a controversial subject apparently, despite it being really clearly explained in several sources. And I think I don't know why people are in denial about that. Maybe because they don't actually apply that in their own performance practice, or because they like to think that Wim is always lying and distorting sources, but anyway, several sources indicate clearly that accentuation is to be understood both as agogic and dynamic accentuation. That is to say that to accentuate means playing a note louder, but also lingering on it more than its written value suggests. And then that's up to the performer to find the right balance between those dynamic and agogic aspects. And we have sources that can help us to do that, and that help us also to know where to accentuate. And we have, for instance, Beethoven's annotation to the grammar studies, something that is ignored by pretty much everyone. You won't hear about it in master classes, weirdly enough. You won't hear it. You won't hear people from the historically informed performance practice movement talking about that. And I don't really understand why, because this is really Beethoven directly speaking to us and really giving us practical examples of what accentuation, about what accentuation was and how to accentuate. So this is even more precisely described than in treatises, for instance. But anyway, we can see that in some of these studies, he asked for accentuation every 2/16 notes in fast movements, and that's something that is impossible to do with modern speeds, even with the -20% options, because that's often what is done in modern performance practice. People are often playing below the metronome mark, and metronome marks for the grammar studies are very, very problematic. But here, even playing below them won't help you with accentuation. So why do we need to play slower if we want to do accentuation? Well, basically we need to have control control of our fingers, which is impossible to do at 15 notes per second. And you need also to have space between the notes, some time between the notes, if you want to make some of them longer than their written value. Then another aspect of performance practice is fingering. I don't know much about that, but what Wim says about the closed hand position, about how the hand shouldn't be extended, it obviously requires to do more articulation gaps. And if I don't want the release of the keys to be awful, then we cannot play too fast. We have also the rhetorical aspects, but that completely disappear at modern speeds, but also the way, for instance, Beethoven describes that we must find counter melodies inside what seems to be monophonic melodic lines. And that disappears also at fast speeds. You can hear the different voices inside those apparently monophonic voices. Then we have also the tempo rubato, which was understood between other things as polyrhythm. It really becomes lost at modern speeds. For instance, Chopin uses quite a lot of written out tempo rubato, so polyrhythm, and the Fantaisie impromptu is one example. and the outer parts of this piece are really based on polyrhythm. And in single beat, because these pieces can be played in single beat or even faster than single beat, the tempo rubato is completely lost. The ear cannot perceive the polyrhythm, and we know that audiences of that time understood polyrhythm as one hand playing in a completely different meter than the other one. But that effect is, we cannot find it again in modern performance practice. So now we come to the more theoretical side of things, of the contexts, and Czerny, for instance, still in, I think, in the 19th century, talks about it clearly. He says that the fastest note value, the time signature, I think also the harmonic density, the polyphonic complexity, all have an influence about on the tempo. And he speaks also, as well as many other authors, about the affects, the character of the piece, but that's more subjective perhaps. So now it's time to see how we can apply all of that to our piece, the first movement of this Haydn sonata. The time signature is 2/4, and as Wim already said, it is to be understood as a 4/8 time signature because the fastest note value is faster than the 16th note. I don't know much about this 2/4/4/8 time signature, so I looked at early 19th century metronomizations by Czerny and Moscheles, the metronomization of Beethoven piano sonatas, and the sonata opus 10 number 2 and 14 number 2 have similar notation to this Haydn sonata, and Czerny and Moscheles give tempi between quarter note 80 and quarter note 112, which give us a tempo range. So now concerning the affect, I think this piece is about, I think of this piece as someone in a rather cheerful mood, taking a pleasant stroll in the nature or something like that. I think that at quarter note 80 it is more of an Allegro maestoso, too heavy for this piece, not light, not cheerful enough. And then around quarter note 100, I think on the contrary that it is too much of an Allegro con brio, too brilliant, and not enough pleasant, not enough relaxed. So this narrows down a little bit our tempo range, and to narrow it down further, we have to look more closely at the score. For instance, here we need to have some time in order to play this turn, and we need to play it with clarity, so this gives us once again an upper limit in terms of tempo. In this part of the piece, the B played by the right hand is repeated just after by the left hand, and if we release the first B too fast, it will really sound harsh, and it won't sound well. So it gives us once again an upper limit. And I must also make the remark here that I am, in a way, I am biased because I am playing with and researching in a way with a modern piano in mind. And we should always, when it comes to tempo research, obviously, we should always have in mind and play with the period instruments in mind. Then for this part I am actually following Leopold Mozart's advice, who said that there is always a part of a piece or of a movement that indicates the tempo for the whole movement. And I think that it is the case here. It should be played with some fluidity, so not too slow, not too maestoso, not too heavy, but it shouldn't be brilliant. It should be cantabile, unlike most of the rest of the sonata, to have this nice contrasts with what comes just before. And some other practical considerations have led me to hesitate between quarter note 88 and quarter note 92. And Wim often mentions Jacques van Oort-Meissen saying that when small tempo changes bring huge musical consequences, that means that we are close to the right tempo. And I think it is the case here. And in the end, I am playing the piece around quarter note 92.